They say every fairy tale begins with a message. Isabella's came in the middle of a rainy Manchester night. You look like someone who deserves the world, the text read. Within months, Fahd al-Hariri, a man whose name shimmered across Forbes lists and social media, was flying her to Saudi Arabia. Cameras flashed as she waved goodbye to a life of rent payments and bus rides. But what she didn't know was that beyond the marble gates and gold-lined walls, the world she'd been promised was already designed to disappear her. This wasn't a love story. It was a transaction dressed as devotion. And the first step toward captivity disguised as luxury. The first week was paradise. Or at least, that's what she told herself. The mansion was everything she'd ever imagined. Mirrored halls, private chefs, silk dresses laid on her bed each morning. Fahd's attention was intoxicating, his compliments rehearsed perfection. Yet something about the silence of the place felt wrong. No laughter, no footsteps, no sounds beyond the hum of air conditioning and the distant call to prayer. When she asked about friends, Fahd smiled and said, "You have everything you need here." The words lingered longer than the echo. Each door opened to another world of luxury, but none of them led outside. When Isabella reached for the front gate one morning, a guard stepped forward, expression firm. "Not today, madam," he said politely. But without warmth, she laughed awkwardly, assuming a misunderstanding, but his eyes didn't waver. When she returned inside, Fahd was already waiting, calm but cold. "You don't need to go anywhere," he said, voice low. "Everything outside is chaos. You're safe here." It was the first time the word safe felt like a threat. That night, she called her mother. The signal cut in and out, her voice swallowed by static. "It's beautiful here," Isabella said, forcing a smile that no one could see. Her mother asked if she was happy. Isabella hesitated. Behind her, the reflection in the glass showed Fahd in the hallway, silently watching her. "Nice," she whispered finally. "I'm happy." Then the line went dead. When she turned around, Fahd was gone, but the perfume of his cologne still hung in the air, a silent reminder that he never really left. By the end of the first month, her laughter sounded foreign even to herself. The gilded world she'd been promised had no exits, no neighbors, no voices, only routines, tea, silence, and surveillance. The cameras blinked red in every corner and her passport was gone, for safekeeping. Fahd began traveling more, but the house seemed to breathe even when he wasn't there. And somewhere behind the mirrored corridors, she thought she heard whispers, another woman's sobs, fading into the walls. The mansion never slept. Even in silence, Isabella could feel it. Cameras shifting, air vents humming like distant whispers. Each morning, servants arrived without greeting her, setting breakfast trays in perfect symmetry. The food was always untouched by the time Fahd entered. "You must eat," he'd say gently, sliding the tray closer. His tone carried warmth, but his eyes delivered commands. When she asked for her passport, he only smiled. "You're my wife now. You don't need those things." She laughed softly, but inside, a cold certainty began to grow. She wasn't a guest, she was property. Days melted together like heat on glass. Her phone had vanished. Her social media accounts, gone. When she asked about it, Fahd's assistant, a tall woman named Layla, lowered her eyes and whispered, "It's better this way." Isabella followed her down the corridor one afternoon and caught the sound of muffled crying from a closed door. Layla's hands trembled as she locked it. "Some memories are dangerous," she murmured. That night, Isabella dreamt of that locked room, of the cries echoing through marble halls, wondering how many others had lived this same dream before her. When Fahd left for business, freedom seemed near, until Isabella realized his absence changed nothing. The staff obeyed invisible rules. The gates never opened. She tried walking the gardens, but guards watched her every step, their earpieces crackling. "Just some fresh air," she muttered. One guard, young and nervous, replied quietly, "Not too far, madam." The air felt heavier, thicker, like the desert itself disapproved of her breathing it. Even the birds avoided the marble fountain. She looked up at the sky, wide and empty, and for the first time it looked like another ceiling. That evening, Fod returned unannounced. He poured wine but didn't drink. "Do you love me?" he asked. His voice was smooth, his gaze sharp. "Of course," Isabella whispered. "Then why do you try to leave?" Her heart stumbled. I wanted air." His smile vanished, replaced by a measured silence that lasted too long. "You don't need air that isn't mine," he said finally. The words hung in the air like smoke. He rose, kissed her forehead, and walked away, leaving her frozen, realizing she'd just heard her first warning. That night, Isabella walked barefoot through the house, guided by moonlight. The halls were colder than usual, her reflection following her in every mirror. She stopped at the locked door again. The faintest sound, a whisper, maybe a sob, seeped through the crack beneath it. She knelt, ear pressed to the floor, heart hammering. Then, the sound of a key turning behind her made her blood freeze. Fod's voice came softly from the shadows. "You shouldn't be here." When she turned, his face was calm, but his hand held the key. And the truth she wasn't meant to find. Days blurred into one another until time itself felt fictional. Isabella had stopped counting mornings. The mirrors became her only company, reflections that no longer looked quite like her. One afternoon, while brushing her hair, she realized the cameras moved when she did. She stared directly into one, defiant. Somewhere behind the walls, a faint click responded. That night, Layla slipped into her room with eyes darting toward the ceiling. "You must stop fighting," she whispered. "He watches everything." But Isabella only smiled, a small broken thing. "Then let him watch me disappear." The next morning, Fod surprised her with a gift. A diamond necklace so heavy it almost hurt to wear. "It's for you," he said softly. "You're my jewel." When she didn't smile, his gaze darkened. "I give you everything, and still you're not happy." His voice rose, echoing through the marble hall. "Do you know how many women would die for this life?" The necklace glittered coldly in her trembling hands. "Maybe they already have," she whispered under her breath. He didn't answer. He just turned and left, leaving her with the sound of doors locking behind him. The house was alive now, not just with whispers, but with memories. Layla finally spoke in full sentences. "There were others," she said quietly as they folded linens in the service room. "Foreign wives. Some ran, some vanished." Isabella froze mid-fold. "Where did they go?" Layla's gaze fell to the floor. "You should not ask." The air thickened with unspoken truths. In that moment, Isabella understood. She wasn't the first, and unless she acted soon, she would not be the last. That night, the power went out. The house plunged into silence, except for a faint hum from the generator. Isabella moved through the darkness, heart pounding, flashlight trembling in her hand. In the west wing, the one Fod always kept locked, she found a narrow door ajar. Inside were suitcases, women's clothes, passports with faces she didn't recognize. British, French, even Russian. The flashlight beam caught one name. Amelia Thorne. The photo was smiling, but the edges of the passport were smeared with something dark. It wasn't dust. It was dried blood. By dawn, Isabella wasn't the same woman who had stepped off the plane. She stared at her reflection. Unrecognizable, hollow-eyed, trembling. In the corner of the mirror, A camera lens blinked red. Slowly, she raised her hand and covered it. "Not today," she whispered. Then, for the first time, she wrote something down. A note to herself hidden inside a book. "If I vanish, tell my mother I didn't run. I was taken." The mansion hummed faintly, alive and watchful, as the last of her old self slipped quietly into the walls. Sleep abandoned Isabella. For 3 nights she mapped the mansion in her head. Every corridor, every door that clicked at midnight. The plan was madness, but so was staying. She had one ally. Layla. Together they whispered in the kitchen, pretending to discuss recipes. "There's a service gate," Layla murmured. "Unlocked only at dawn for deliveries." Isabella's heart pounded so loud she feared the cameras would hear. "Can you distract the guards?" she asked. Layla nodded once, eyes brimming with quiet courage. The plan was set, and if it failed, it would end with her buried behind those walls. At dawn, she moved silently through the corridors. Every creak felt like a scream. Her bare feet kissed the cold marble as she clutched the stolen key Layla had slipped beneath her door hours earlier. Downstairs, the sound of a guard's footsteps echoed faintly. Too close. She ducked behind a column, breath shaking, pulse roaring in her ears. For a moment, the guard's flashlight swept across the floor, missing her by inches. The second it faded, she ran, heart first, fear second, toward the door that meant everything. Freedom. The gate stood there, small, unassuming, yet glowing like salvation. Isabella slipped the key in, hands trembling. It turned. A soft click echoed like thunder in her ears, but just as she began to push, a voice pierced the air behind her. "Going somewhere?" Fod's tone was casual, almost amused. She froze. Slowly, she turned. He stood in his robe, barefoot, eyes calm and merciless. Layla stood behind him, crying silently. "I told you," he said, stepping closer. "Everything here belongs to me. Even hope." He didn't shout. That was worse. He simply took the key from her hand and gestured to the guards. "Return her room," he said quietly. As they led her away, Fod turned to Layla. And her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Later that night, Isabella lay in her bed listening. The heavy thud of footsteps, then a muffled cry, then nothing. The next morning, Layla was gone. Her uniform, folded neatly on a chair, was all that remained. Fod greeted Isabella at breakfast with a smile. "You see? Disobedience always disappears." For 3 days, Isabella didn't speak. The mansion had claimed Layla, and now it was claiming her mind. Every sound, the soft clink of silverware, the closing of a door, felt like a countdown. But grief had hardened into resolve. She stared into the nearest camera, whispering, "You can't keep me." Somewhere deep inside her, the spark reignited, small, defiant, alive. She began hiding small things again. A piece of wire, a map drawn on tissue, a hidden note in the book where her warning lay. The first escape had failed, but the next one wouldn't. The mansion felt emptier without Layla, but her absence whispered louder than her presence ever did. Days later, Isabella found something folded beneath her pillow. A note in Layla's delicate handwriting. The West Wing wall. Behind the mirror, that night, when Fod was gone, Isabella pried the mirror loose. Dust rained down as she revealed a narrow passage. The air was colder, older. She stepped inside with a flashlight, the silence swallowing her. On the walls, she saw scratches, names carved into the plaster. Dozens of them. The last one read, "Layla." Her breath caught. Layla hadn't disappeared. She'd been buried inside the house itself. She followed the passage deeper, her flashlight trembling as it illuminated relics of forgotten lives. Jewelry boxes, torn photos, women's shoes left in rows like abandoned ghosts. The air smelled of iron and perfume. Then she found it, a small metal door. On the other side was a hidden basement. Inside, a room with surveillance monitors showing every corner of the house. Fod's voice came from a speaker. "If you're watching this, Isabella, you've gone too far." Her body froze. The door slammed behind her. She was trapped inside the house within the house, the one no one was meant to see. The walls whispered with recordings. Her laughter, her phone calls, her cries. Every moment of her life here had been preserved. Then a new voice played, a woman pleading English. "Please, I won't tell anyone." Another recording followed, then another. Voices layered like a ghostly chorus, all echoing through the speakers. She covered her ears, sobbing, but one final recording silenced her completely. Fod's voice saying, "Shall learn obedience." The sound of her own scream answered it. The scream she hadn't made yet. It was as if the house already knew what came next. She pounded on the door until her hands bled. Then she noticed something glinting on the floor. A small silver bracelet engraved with initials. "L.A. Leilas!" Clutching it, Isabella whispered, "You didn't die for nothing." Using the wire she'd hidden days earlier, she picked the lock. The door clicked open just as heavy footsteps echoed above. She ran. Barefoot. Frantic. Through the dark passage, her heart beating louder than the alarms that suddenly began blaring. The house roared awake, but she was done being silent. As she burst back into the main hall, the mansion seemed alive with fury. Alarms wailing, guards shouting, doors locking. She darted through the corridor toward the glass atrium, her reflection multiplying endlessly. Then she saw Fod at the top of the staircase, calm amidst chaos. "You think you can escape me," he said. Isabella looked up, trembling but resolute. "No," she said, voice steady for the first time. "I'm going to expose you." For the first time, his face changed, not to anger, but to fear, because now she knew everything. The mansion burned with noise. Alarms shrieked like sirens from hell, red light pulsing through the halls. Isabella ran barefoot, the cold marble slick beneath her feet. Guards shouted orders, radios crackling, footsteps closing in. She burst into the study, slamming the door behind her. On the desk, Fod's laptop still open. Emails, names, passport scans. Dozens of women like her. "He kept records," she whispered. Hands trembling, she hit send all to the police address Layla had written in her note. A single word flashed on screen. Sent. Then the doorknob turned. The door exploded open. Fod stood there, chest heaving, robe half torn, eyes wild, the charm gone, replaced by raw fury. "You think you can destroy me?" he shouted. Isabella backed away, clutching a broken glass shard. "You already did," she said. He lunged. The glass sliced across his forearm, crimson blooming. He didn't stop. They crashed into the desk, scattering papers and screens. Her body hit the floor, but her voice didn't break. "I sent everything," she screamed. His hand gripped her throat, and for a moment, silence returned. Heavy and absolute. In that stillness, a sound broke through. Sirens, faint at first, then swelling. Fod froze. His grip loosened. Isabella gasped, pushing him off. Outside, the roar of engines filled the air. "They're here!" she croaked, voice rasping. Fod's eyes flickered between rage and disbelief. "You don't understand," he hissed. "They'll never touch me." But the pounding on the iron gate said otherwise. He looked back toward the window, and for the first time she saw fear in him. Real fear. Fod grabbed her arm, desperate now. "You'll tell them it was a misunderstanding," he demanded. She stared up at him, voice trembling but unbroken. No, I'll tell them everything. He looked ready to strike again, but before his hand rose, the front door exploded inward. Police flooded in, weapons drawn. Fahd turned, shouting in Arabic, but they tackled him to the ground. Isabella sat frozen, trembling, blood on her hands. Not sure if she was alive or simply unfinished. One officer wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "You're safe now," he said. But even he didn't sound sure. As they led her outside, the dawn broke pale and colorless over Riyadh. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, but all she heard was the ringing in her ears, the echo of silence she'd lived in for months. In the police car's reflection, she saw herself. Hair tangled, face streaked, eyes alive. She didn't feel free yet, just emptied. But in her lap, Layla's bracelet, still warm in her hand. "We did it," she whispered. The gates closed behind them, and for the first time, she didn't look back. Hospitals are supposed to smell like hope. This one smelled like bleach and questions. Isabella sat beneath white lights, wrapped in gauze and disbelief, as detectives moved in and out of the room. Detective Samir Al-Faraj introduced himself quietly. "You are safe now," he said, but safety felt abstract, a word she could no longer trust. They asked for every detail, every name. She told them everything. When she finished, Samir looked at her and said, "You weren't the first. But you might be the last." For the first time in months, she exhaled. Not relief, but release. Within days, the headlines came: British woman held captive in Saudi palace, billionaire's wife or prisoner. They called her naive, reckless, dramatic. Fahd's lawyers spun tales of cultural misunderstanding and mental instability. Isabella watched from her hospital bed, the noise of the world louder than her heartbeat. When Samir visited again, he brought good news. And a grim truth. "He'll face trial," he said. "But men like him have long shadows." She nodded. "So do survivors." Weeks later, she stepped into sunlight again. London's skies gray and cold, but alive. Photographers waited outside the airport, flashes igniting like gunfire. Her mother ran to her, tears spilling, arms trembling. "You're home," she whispered. Isabella clung to her, but the word home felt strange, almost foreign. The crowd chanted questions, but Isabella stayed silent. She'd spoken enough inside those walls. For now, survival was her only statement. Months passed. The court case stretched endlessly, drowning in wealth and politics. But one morning, Samir called. "It's done," he said simply. Fahd was convicted, multiple counts of unlawful confinement and abuse. A rare victory in a place built to silence women like her. Isabella didn't cry. She simply looked out the window of her small London flat, the same kind of rain that started it all tapping against the glass. She whispered, "Layla, we did it." The city lights reflected faintly in her eyes, fragments of a freedom she was still learning to believe in. Months later, Isabella filmed her testimony for a global documentary on human trafficking. Her voice calm, her story no longer a secret. "It doesn't start with violence," she said into the camera. "It starts with a promise." The lights dimmed as she finished, and for a long moment silence filled the studio. Outside, rain fell softly. The same rhythm that once echoed in Manchester the night she met him. Only now she wasn't waiting for someone to save her. She had already saved herself.